Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michel Bechard. I'm here representing Secure Data, part one of the Secure Data presentations for today. And I'm going to be talking to you about Endpoint, but from a slightly different perspective. Not your usual, this is your endpoint, it's under constant threat, it's going to kill you. This is about the past and present and what we perceive as possibly the future of endpoint security. But of course, the question is, why does the desktop matter? We spend a lot of money on our network-level perimeter devices, our firewalls, our IDSs, SIEMs. Why is the desktop so important? One very particular reason is the desktop is the user. As soon as that desktop has been owned, the user is owned. The My Documents folder is owned, all the rights and privileges of that user are owned. That desktop is actually that user's foothold into the rest of the environment. And of course, desktops are traditionally very soft and juicy targets. That's the low-hanging fruit. They're very easy to get onto simply because they're so complex. And as the previous speaker was saying, very often they're left unpatched. So it's fairly trivial to get onto the desktop from the experienced, well, not necessarily experienced, but from the attacker's perspective. Also, what happens with the desktop once it has become owned is through simple privilege escalation techniques, it becomes trivial to move around the environment, to get to the servers, which would traditionally be more difficult to get onto, simply because you're doing it as a local admin or as a domain administrator. But what has become interesting about the desktop is originally started back in about 2011, because a new reason for owning a desktop came into existence. If you think about in today's landscape, who is actually targeting the desktop? Well, simply because of crypto miners, because of ransomware, you've now got the general public targeting the desktop. But over and above that, the desktop is also a perfect starting point for government espionage as well as corporate espionage. And because it became so simple to compromise the desktop, because it became a central point of attention, we started seeing the rise of specialist agencies, one of which was known as Finfisher. And you might remember this from circa 2014, when a German consulting company who wrote specialist software got breached by a rival, and all of their documentation was uploaded onto WikiLeaks. But what I want to draw to your attention here is that these were a proper corporate set of mechanisms. They were a proper business. This wasn't something a script kiddie would do. And what I want to bring to your attention here, and you can get this directly off the WikiLeaks site, is how they went about testing the efficiency and the efficacy of their malware. And what I'd just like to highlight to you here is if you look at the full master boot record and full Trojan, no antivirus software, no matter how sophisticated, could stop that desktop from becoming the staging point for further attacks. You'll notice, also possibly on the left there, that for the sake of maybe spending 1 or 2 or 3 million euros on a development team, their return on investment was something like 50 million. That's a good business to be in. So, and one of the ones I want to talk to you about to start with is called the DDE exploit, or Dynamic Data Exchange. What DDE does at the endpoint is allow inter-process communications between things like Excel and Word, or PowerPoint and Excel. So you could embed an Excel spreadsheet in a Word document. You double-click the Excel icon, I suppose you'd call it, and of course Excel will launch and you'll have all your documents there ready for you. And you're probably all very familiar with this yellow warning bar that Microsoft have built in, asking you whether you truly want to enable the content. What I'm going to show to you is a mechanism our SensePost consulting arm, our ethical hacking team, if you like, employ for our red team assessments, employ for our penetration tests that leverages the built-in feature of Microsoft Office that uses DDE. On the right-hand side in yellow, we have a Windows 8 machine. No comments about Windows 8, please. On the left-hand side, we have a listener, a Netcat listener, if anybody's familiar with Netcat. And down at the bottom here, we have an HTTP web server. What's going to happen might find a little scary. And I'm going to need a bit of Kieran's help on this one. So just want to demonstrate to you, Kieran, if you wouldn't mind. What we have here is one of our analysts just identifying who they are, and you'll see that they come up as a user on the system, so they have no administrative privileges. Kieran, if you would. So there we go, user, and up here we see that there are users. Now, open an Excel spreadsheet sent via email. Kieran, if you wouldn't mind. Excel will always start in column A, row number 1. And what our guys do is put an Excel formula in there. Formulas will not be blocked by anti-spam, by antivirus. There's no macro, it's just a formula. A formula that says pretty much right up the top there, equals command pipe cevilserver.com. Why is that important? Kieran, if you would please. So we enable content, and what you'll see happening over here is that this local machine is now connecting to this web server. I know the print's a little small, you might not be able to see it too well, but what it's done is connect, and it's retrieved a file, a .bat file. There we see, we have the connection. If you could pause there 1 second, please, because what, never mind, because what you may have noticed is the access to this system is local system. We have administrative rights on this box. We can go anywhere we want, do anything we want. Lateral movement is now trivial. Thank you, Kieran. That's not the only type of exploits that we're talking about. Because bat files, yes, you could block them internally. You might find that your Windows updates then stop working. You might find that any GP policy updates stop working, because of course Windows relies on bat files still. So you could turn off your bats, but you can't turn off PowerShell. So let me tell you about Ruler. You might want to, any hobbyists, hackers here, top right-hand corner there, github.com sensepost ruler. What Ruler does is exploit a machine without coming anywhere near it. There's a couple of things that need to be put in place first. You're going to need an email address. You're going to need a password. It can still be hashed, doesn't matter. You then need to find an OWA interface that you can connect to. And we've done that. Over the course of October to November 2016, we found 123,621,000 compromised email addresses, and that was only on Have I Been Pwned. I didn't go and look in Pastebin or anywhere else. Yes, it can be pawned, it can be pwned. So 123 million. Of that 123 million, 1.5 million had the hashed passwords bolted on with them. Very convenient. We then did a scan of 1,000 of OWA instances in the UK and found 1,226 of them. That's just simple scanning techniques like scanning for mail.domain name or OWA.domain name. 1,226. From those 1,226, we ran those compromised user addresses with the hashes and found that we could crack 92% of those hashed passwords, which placed 868 UK organizations at risk of our SensePost team or anybody else with equivalent capabilities. Once you have that username and the password, it's a simple matter of pointing your browser at the organization, create a rule within their Outlook web access instance, wait for it to synchronize with the desktop Outlook client, and then send a trigger email. Let me show you how that works in action. Double click, there we go. Okay, so this is the official video of how to crack somebody's desktop. So let's start here. if you could stop for 1 second there, please, Kieran. Over here, what we've done is loaded up a username list and a password list, hashed password list, and we're now running through standard John the Ripper type crackers or any one of the password cracking types. And as you'll see, very soon we will find John Ford's password. Kieran, if you would. Okay, it's up there somewhere. I can't see it from here either. So we now have a username and we now have a password. Next thing to do, use our ruler tool to log in to their Outlook web access instance. And that's what we're doing right here. Authentication succeeded, MAPI and HTTP is available. So we're now connected to somebody else's Outlook web access server. If you could pause there, please, Kieran. Because what I want to point out to you is we now have everything interesting. Retrieving rules, third last entry down here, found 0 rules. So this mailbox currently has 0 rules in it. Kieran, if you could, please. And here we see John Ford's mailbox, because we've logged into it, right? If we then go and have a look, you'll see no rules. The proof is in the pudding. Let's go back to ruler. What we do now is we go and create a rule as John Ford in the Outlook web access instance. So there we go, connected to the server, retrieving the MAPI info, user John Ford, rule added, stop there please, Kieran. Rule added. So we have now, as John Ford, created a rule in his mailbox. Here, if you would. And we can verify that by logging into John Ford's Outlook instance. And there we see we have a rule called popper, pause please, which will run a command when an email containing the word pop is received. Kieran, if you could. So what do we do next? We go to our local mail client and we send an email to John Ford saying, "Hi John, please pop a shell." The word pop being the trigger here. This is the trigger email that we're sending. And there we go. That mail is now delivered. And here's our background listener sitting, waiting for that mail to be delivered. Waiting a little bit longer. The internet must have been a little bit slow that day, probably restoring it from backup. But very soon, we're going to go across to John Ford's inbox. There we go. And there will be there's your email. And parsing the rules, we'll very soon see that reverse shell, that command, there we go, coming back to the listening server. So we now have a shell, a PowerShell instance, onto John Ford's Windows desktop. Okay? We now are sysadmins on John Ford's Windows desktop. If we then have a look, you'll see that the email has self-deleted. And once we've established that communication, we're going to go back in and create a rule that deletes the rule. So that rule is going to be erased. It's as if we've never even been there. And yet within a case of what? How long did that take? 2 minutes? 3 minutes? We now have domain-level access within John Ford's organization. This is something that antivirus cannot do anything about. This is how the bad guys, the attackers, are evolving to be able to bypass your network layer mechanisms, your firewalls, because that's just an Outlook rule, right? Your IDS, that's not going to pick it up, it's just an email. Your anti-spam, it's not going to pick it up. There's no content in the email. There's nothing there to trigger an anti-spam rule. The antivirus is going to pick it up, so we've just gone through 4 different layers of defense. Even your SIM's not going to pick that up because nothing bad has happened. Just having a PowerShell instance. So where does that then take us? What can the endpoint security manufacturers do about it? Well, there's sort of 3 trends that we see in the marketplace. There's what we might call the traditional signature-based antivirus. But this, of course, is also evolving. And what we are seeing is that there's some kind of suspended state that a Word document or a PDF will sit in while that endpoint antivirus is referring back to the cloud for newer signatures. I mean, you're probably running antivirus within your organizations now, possibly a 4-hour definition database update, something like that. Okay, well, this is going to go and have a look at the cloud in that 4-hour interim. The next thing that we're seeing is the non-signature based, the more heuristic analysis. What is this file doing on my endpoint kind of approach? And there's two directions this is going in. There's one, which is stripping any active content from documents. So you've got a word with a macro in it, comes in, let's say, via email. The macro gets stripped out. The document is delivered. And of course, then the system administrator or the security team can put the macro back in if it's something going, something that needs that macro to be active. The other option is more of a, what would you call it, a behavior type of analysis, but not sort of file level behavior. It's more about memory level and CPU register level. So what is happening deep within the core of that machine? Is this file, this process, this child process, trying to do something overwriting memory in the CPU, or something along those lines? So it's very much almost like exploit detection. The third type of things that we're seeing is what's commonly called EDR, endpoint detection and response. And this is, again, more signature-based, but whereas 50% of it is signature-based, the other 50% is also more behavior-based, where it's a matter of being able to identify that an exploit has taken place, that an infection has taken place, and then tracing that infection back through the email it came in from, the mail server it landed on, and all the way through towards the end user. What processes did it spawn? What child processes did it spawn? What registry changes did it make? So that's sort of more of the EDR type of environment. And each one has its strengths, each one has its weaknesses. So sometime in the future, we're sort of expecting something that's a hybrid of those three approaches. Which then leads me to hand you over to AD from Checkpoint, who's going to be talking to you about their approach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is AD Ringrose and I'm the Threat Prevention Sales Manager for Checkpoint Software Technologies here in the UK. What does that actually mean? Well, I am responsible for Checkpoint's award-winning enterprise advanced threat prevention solution called SandBlast. SandBlast is built from the ground up to provide proactive prevention from what Checkpoint term as the 5th generation of cyber attacks. So a brief outline of what I'll be covering off today, and don't worry, I'm acutely aware that I'm standing between lunch for you guys, so I'll try and be as concise as I possibly can. I'm just going to touch upon the threat landscape from an endpoint perspective, and then I'll talk a bit about, in the last couple of minutes, the solution that we have here at Checkpoint. There we go. So Checkpoint has kept pace with cyber attacks over the last 25 to 30 years. I won't go through all of these, but to give you a couple of examples, if we start off with the first generation of attacks, this started off with viruses attacking standalone PCs and what's the word I'm looking for? Attacking standalone PCs via floppy disks, effectively done for fun. With the dawn of the internet and the second generation of attacks, we saw attackers starting to attack networks. And as a result, Checkpoint developed the world's first stateful inspection firewall. But we now feel that at Checkpoint we're in the 5th generation of cyber attacks. So what are the characteristics of one of these attacks? Well, firstly, they spread worldwide, not only across geographical territories, but across industries very, very quickly. If we look at the example of NotPetya last year, that started off in Ukraine and spread worldwide within days. Secondly, we are seeing people develop exploit techniques and pieces of malicious code with almost unlimited resources. If we take the example of WannaCry last year that affected us here in the UK, that used an exploit called Eternal Blue that was developed by the US National Security Agency. We're seeing the impact of these attacks not only cause financial or reputational damage to companies, but they are causing real-world societal impact. And another great example of that is WannaCry from last year here in the UK, where it caused the cancellation of 19,000 hospital appointments, some of which were operations. And lastly, we're seeing these attacks enter organisations across different surfaces. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you think of your organisation or enterprise as a city, The surface would be the route in, which road did they come in on, did they take a train line or which airport, with the vector being the actual mode of transport, did they come in on a truck or a car or a plane. And I guess what we're really trying to highlight here is we're seeing attackers leverage weaknesses in the security of cloud applications and mobile devices to do things like steal corporate credentials and then use that information to gain access to other areas of the corporate network. So why do we feel at Checkpoint advanced endpoint or next generation antivirus solutions are essential these days? Well, by and large these days, the phrase working 9 to 5 is limited to Dolly Parton fans in karaoke bars. We're seeing that we're moving to an era of hypermobility, effectively creating the anywhere office. We're seeing also as a kind of baked-in standard feature of modern malware, the ability to move laterally within an organization. Both NotPetya and WannaCry last year were designed to not actually start encrypting anything on a machine for the first 60 minutes. They spent the first 60 minutes trying to spread laterally within inside the organization prior to actually making anyone aware that they were or had infected the machine itself. We see endpoints as the final frontier. At Checkpoint, we've seen some malware variants out there in the wild that are so sophisticated they can evade even the most advanced network controls and can only be picked up on the device itself in runtime. And last but not least, the ability to provide detailed forensic information from an endpoint perspective we feel is absolutely paramount these days. Ultimately, the more automated we can make that process, the quicker we can get our users back to work. So what kinds of attacks are we seeing on endpoints at Checkpoint? Well, interestingly, over half of all attacks on endpoints don't actually involve any kind of payload. They are typically trying to steal corporate credentials, take over accounts, and use that information to gain access to other areas of the corporate environment. Only about 35%, or about a third, of all attacks on endpoints involve some kind of payload or malware. And I think the interesting thing here is that certainly from a next generation antivirus perspective, most of the solutions on the market only focus on malware. And in our opinion, they're only addressing about a third of the problem. So this slide was originally created for CPX in 2017, that's the Checkpoint Experience event. And it was really to do nothing other than highlight at the time that the thinking was the best way to make money from cybercrime was to hold people's data to ransom. So what's changed? Right now, I'm considering a purchase. Typically in computing, we are trying to draw heat away from the room where we do the processing, but you can actually now buy heaters that will heat your home whilst mining cryptocurrency from the excess heat from GPUs and CPUs. So if we move to 2018, ransomware is definitely on the decline. And I think it's principally for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's become a less effective way to generate funds for cybercrime. Malware like NotPetya effectively ruined the reputation of ransomware, as there was no way to actually recover the data once you paid the ransom. Not only that, it's a particularly noisy way to generate money from a cybercrime perspective. Your users are acutely aware that they've been infected. So we are seeing in 2018 the rise of the crypto miner or cryptojacking tools. How much money can you make? Well, as of last week, when I checked last time, the average price or the current exchange rate for a Bitcoin was just over £3,500. So every 10 minutes when those transactions are signed, that generates just under £44,000 in terms of a payout. Now, I appreciate that money is shared, but of course, that's just one of a number of cryptocurrencies out there to be mined. So it's, as you can see, a very, very lucrative business to be in. The more machines you can infect, the more money you can make effectively. And to really highlight the problem, this information was taken from hundreds of thousands of gateways across the globe. And as we can see in the first half of 2018, the top 3 malware variants globally were all crypto mining or cryptojacking tools. So in summary, we feel at Checkpoint that cryptojacking has become the new cash cow for cybercrime. We'll take the money, but someone else can pay for the processing power and someone else can pay the electricity bill. So what do we do about this? Well, before I get into Sandblast specifically, I just want to mention that Sandblast is part of Checkpoint's overarching Infinity Enterprise Security Platform, single pane of glass management with shared threat intelligence across our threat cloud service. The Sandblast itself pivots around 2 core security patterns: threat emulation to look for bad things, and threat extraction to proactively block threats without causing any delays or interruptions to normal business flow. So if we dig into emulation first, we are using just over 30 advanced detection engines, all working concurrently to provide our customers with the highest threat prevention or threat detection rate on the market currently. If you read the last NSS Labs breach prevention report, we had 100% efficacy. So if we dig into a few that are unique to us at Checkpoint and quite interesting for me, what we're doing at the CPU level is we're looking for evasion techniques. So little pieces of code that would do something like tell a piece of malware not to detonate in a virtual environment to evade a sandbox, or delayed detonation of the malware by 60 minutes, so hopefully at that point it's passed through the sandbox. With push forward, we are simulating flash browsing sessions. We're putting a framework around them that will cause any malware to detonate rather than appear benign. Flash is quite an interesting attack vector. There are lots of known, very well publicized vulnerabilities within Flash, and it's a route that we're seeing at Checkpoint is often traversed by attackers. And the last one, context-aware detection, or Cadet, is by far one of the coolest AI engines that I think we have at Checkpoint. Essentially what we do is, rather than looking at a single file or a link within a file, we take the IOCs from all of those 30-plus detection engines that I talked about, and take all of the information we have up in Threat Cloud, 25 years worth of big data and threat information, and run that through an AI algorithm tuned around verdict accuracy. And what we've been able to do with Cadet is effectively eliminate false positives within our solution. Moving to threat prevention or threat extraction, we're one of the only solutions on the market that's able to do inline blocking with no disruption to normal business flow. How do we do that? We do that with something called threat extraction, which Michel very kindly plugged for me earlier in his presentation. With threat extraction, we proactively remove any active code from documents as they come into the business and send a sanitized copy to the users. It operates in two modes. You can retain the original format, so if you get sent an Excel, you receive an Excel minus the active content, so JavaScript or macros, or we can flatten it to a PDF for a higher level of security. How am I doing for time? A couple of minutes. Okay, so I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the capabilities specific to endpoint devices we have at Checkpoint. So we're able to apply all of the good things I've just talked about to endpoints when they're not within the corporate environment. If a user downloads a file from the internet, that file is sent to either a cloud service or an on-premise sandbox for extraction and sanitization. And if the user does require a copy of the original file, they can request it. That process is entirely self-catered. We're able to not only protect your users from phishing, but from zero-day phishing. So phishing sites that have just been spun up that no one's ever seen before. So in this example, we get a legitimate-looking email asking us to reset our Office 365 credentials. What we do is we dynamically analyze that website on the fly, not only looking at the reputation of the domain or the IP address, but we're looking at things like visual similarity, textual similarity. Is it a genuine Office 365 logo or the current one from the Office 365 website? We're able to stop people repurposing their corporate credentials for personal applications, something that's quite pertinent given the not too long ago LinkedIn data breach. If a user tries to reuse their corporate credentials for a personal application, we can quite simply stop that from happening. We are constantly looking at outbound communication on endpoints for things like data exfiltration and communication with command and control servers. Quite pertinent given the conversation that we had earlier around crypto mining or cryptojacking becoming so prevalent. If required, we're able to lock down individual processes on the device or the entire device itself. We also have a dedicated anti-ransomware function within our Sandblast agent endpoint solution. Essentially what we do is upon detection of any kind of anomalous behavior, we take a snapshot of the file system on that machine so that if a piece of ransomware starts encrypting the files, we're automatically able to roll it back to a pre-infection state. And last but certainly not least, I touched on forensics earlier. The ability to collect detailed forensic data we're seeing as almost paramount these days, and I think that the growth of the endpoint detection and response market is really testament to that. So what we do at Checkpoint is upon any triggering of an event, not necessarily by us, but it can also be a third-party AV, we'll start generating a report that is automatically packaged and sent to your incident response teams. As I said earlier, the more automated we can make that process, the faster we can get your users back to work. And we have some very, very detailed forensic information available within there, including things like point of entry, scope of damage, infected hosts, and the full attack chain lifecycle. So I just wanted to highlight this report in closing. Full disclosure, about 5 years ago, I worked for a very well-known antivirus vendor, and I wouldn't have considered Checkpoint to be part of a competitive landscape at the time. And I think this report really speaks, for me, to the investment that Checkpoint has made over the last 3 or 4 years in our Sandblast agent endpoint solution. Thank you, guys. Enjoy lunch.